That's right, y'all. We're talking carbohydrates, everybody's favorite topic. And by that, I mean nobody's favorite topic. Why are you coming after my bread, Karen? And if you have been in the weight loss space for any amount of time, I guarantee you are absolutely sick of hearing about carbohydrates. So you might be wondering, why, pray tell, are you doing a video on carbohydrates when I'm so sick of hearing about them? Unfortunately, it is of my very strong belief that we must talk about carbohydrates in conjunction with talking about weight loss if we want to have any hope in losing weight. If you are new here, my name is Heather Schucker. I'm a nurse practitioner. I'm a primary care provider, but I am not your primary care provider. So please know that all the information that I'm providing, while I believe to be true, it does not replace medical advice. If you have questions what you should be doing, you need to contact your own provider. So if I'm going to talk to you about carbs, I want to make sure we're all on the same playing field about what I'm talking about. Okay, there are 3 macronutrients. There's protein, there's fat, and there's carbohydrates. Whole foods, things that you can find out in nature, tend to be a combination of macronutrients. That's important because even if you don't buy into a low carb diet, which we'll talk about that in a minute, it is important for you to recognize that the healthier path is going to be whole foods, as close to nature as you can get them. So if you take a look at your diet and it's got a lot of things that you can't find out in nature, then that is probably where you should start as the culprit contributing to your weight problem. The reason carbohydrates have been so demonized and the reason people run into problems with carbohydrates and are being told to eat less carbohydrates is because of the refined carbohydrates that people are overeating in their diet. That would be those highly processed carbs like sugar and grains. What am I talking about? I'm talking about cookies, candies, cakes, crackers. I'm even talking about bread and rice, right? Things that have been bleached and processed and just sent through a factory to a degree that it has been engineered to the point where your body, when it eats it, it's sugar. It's no longer that complex combination of protein and fat and carbohydrate anymore. It has been condensed down to as close to just carbohydrate as possible because food manufacturers realize that those are highly palatable. People are likely to overeat them so they can sell more of them. And that's what they do. And that's what's been done. And that's why so many of us have gotten sick from it. I think the reason that people don't want to talk about carbohydrates is because they want to keep eating them. And I get it. I want to keep eating them too. So really it becomes a decision that you need to make. Do you want to continue eating carbohydrates at the level that you're eating them now and stay overweight, which is of course a choice? That's the choice you've been making. And if that's the choice you want to continue to make, then, have at it. But if you are hoping to lose the weight, which is, I'm assuming while you're watching my channel, you're looking for someone to help you figure out how to get the weight off and keep it off. And I am sorry that you might not like the news, but I truly think that the only way that you're going to lose the weight and keep it off is to dramatically reduce the amount of refined carbohydrates in your diet. Those are the things that put the weight on. So if you keep eating them, you will keep the weight on. And even if you lose the weight, you'll put it back on if you keep eating those foods. They got to go if you want the weight to go. I wish that there was another way. I looked my whole life for another way. I don't think there's another way. I truly, deeply do not believe that we can lose weight and keep it off and eat a high carb diet. I mean, some people are born that way. Some people can eat as many carbs as they want and not put weight on. Bully for them. But if that ain't you, and you're sitting there in a body that has a lot of excess weight that you want to get rid of, but you don't even want to consider not eating the foods that put the weight on, then you're stuck, friend. You're stuck. You can try medication, you can try surgery, and they will likely work for you, but then the weight's coming back. There is no way out of this that doesn't involve not eating the foods that made us fat in the first place. I know, the bearer of bad news is what I am. So when you're thinking about going low carb, a reasonable question is, what is low carb? How many carbs are low carb? What does low carb even mean? Lower than what? My guess when we say low carb, what we mean is lower than the standard American diet, which is arguably high carb. One might even say excessive carb. One might even say a toxic level of carbohydrates that's making everyone sick. In fact, instead of calling it a low carb diet, one might just say it's a non-toxic carb diet. That's what we're striving for. No longer having such a high level of carbohydrates that it's making us sick. In fact, I actually think in my mind of type 2 diabetes as a self-induced carbohydrate poisoning. That's what it is. Now, I know that sounds dramatic, but what is poison, right? Poison is something that we ingest that harms us or kills us. And if you look at what people with type 2 diabetes are dealing with, they're at risk for kidney failure and amputation of their legs. Now, I would argue that if you eat so many carbohydrates that your kidneys fail, that you're eating a poisonous level of carbohydrates. That has become a toxic level. So that's what I mean when I talk about carbohydrates as poison or carbohydrates in toxicity. I mean that if you eat too much of them, just like almost anything in excess, it will harm you. You can drink enough water to kill you, right? Too much of anything is harmful. And currently, we have a really big problem with carbohydrate toxicity in this country. I know it is possible to have extra weight on your body and not have type 2 diabetes, just like I know it is possible to have type 2 diabetes and not have extra weight on your body, right? We are all very genetically different and there are huge variations. But there in the middle is where the bulk of the bell curve lies, where if you have extra weight, and especially if you're still gaining, you're likely insulin resistant and heading toward prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. That's just the disease process. It starts with overconsumption of carbohydrates, it progresses to insulin resistance, and then it ends in type 2 diabetes and all the bad things that come with it. So of course, I'm not saying any amount of carbohydrates you eat is going to kill you. That would be crazy. What I am saying, though, is that there is a spectrum, and on one end, you can live a long, healthy life, and on the other end, you can go into kidney failure and have your feet cut off, right? There is a big, wide range of what a healthy level of carbohydrates is versus a toxic level of carbohydrates is. So the question that you should be asking is, where is that point? Where does it switch from being just an energy source that is natural, that humans have been eating since the beginning of time or the beginning of humans, to this toxic level that unfortunately so many are dealing with? Where's that point? Where indeed? Here's the issue. That point is different for different people. I can't give you a number. I can't tell you, dear friend, who is watching this video or listening to my voice, I can't tell you exactly how many carbohydrates you specifically should be eating to keep you healthy versus, dipping into toxicity. We're all very different. There is no one number that applies to everyone. And if someone tries to tell you that there is, well, I call bullshit on that. I would be very wary of someone who tells you definitively that this is the number of carbohydrates that everyone should have. Because we're all built very differently. We have different genetic backgrounds. We have different activity levels. There are a whole lot of variables that go into this number. And of course, this should already be pretty obvious to you, right? Because you know people that can eat as much as they want and they don't seem to gain an ounce, who you could sit next to and eat the same exact thing and you'll put on weight at a breakneck speed and they just stay their skinny little selves. Now, there's no guarantee that they're metabolically healthy, right? But that's another story for another day. But when it comes to weight loss, which is what I'm talking about, you know that different people can tolerate different levels of carbohydrates and have different results. So no, I cannot give you an exact number, but I can certainly head you down a path so you can start to figure out what that number is for yourself. If you even plan to track your carbohydrates and see what your number is. I don't do that. I did do that when I first started so that I had an understanding of, what range of carbohydrates I was eating, but I don't track my food that way at all. And I've been weight stable for more than a year now. So a good way to figure out whether or not you personally are experiencing some level of carb toxicity, the most simple way is, do you have extra weight on your body? If you have extra weight on your body, there's a really high chance that you have some level of carbohydrate toxicity, because for the most part, the extra fat on our body came from eating more carbohydrates than we needed. If we want to not maintain our bodies at that higher fat state, then we need to lower the amount of carbohydrates in our baseline diet so that we won't maintain that much fat. I think the real reason people don't want to talk about low carb when they're talking about weight loss is because of addiction. If you watched my video, what I did to lose 80 pounds, you know that I fully believe that the core to the problem of obesity for people that have a lot of weight that they can't lose is they are in some way addicted to carbohydrates, refined carbohydrates, and they don't want to let them go. And if you don't let go of the food that makes you fat, you don't lose the fat. Now, of course, I'm not saying that carbohydrates are the only thing that, cause people to have a problem with their weight. It is a very complex issue. And of course, I'm not arguing with that. High stress is contributory. Lack of skeletal muscle is contributory. Depending on what your other hormones are doing, that could be contributory. Whole lot of factors. There's a whole lot of things we can change. There's a whole lot of things we can't change. One of the things that we can change is what we're eating every day. And if we can't fix all the other things, if we can't fix our genetic code, then we could certainly give ourselves the best chance by changing our diet. An experience I have had, not only as a healthcare provider, but also as someone who very visibly lost a bunch of weight, is for people to come to me for advice. And when I tell them exactly what I believe they need to do to lose weight, they don't want to hear it. That is a very common thing that I experience. They're hoping that they can continue to eat all the things that they like and not have to exercise and not take any medicines with side effects and certainly not need surgery and still somehow lose weight. Now that just requires an amount of magic that I don't have and that I have not seen anywhere. And I've looked under every rock. That's just not possible. Repeatedly, I talk with people who cannot wrap their brains around letting go of the foods that put the weight on them in the first place. And unfortunately, I don't think that they're ever going to make progress until they can wrap their brains around that. So if that describes you, if you're hearing me say that carbohydrates are likely a big part of your problem and that reducing or eliminating a lot of them is the only way out of this, and you can't stand that thought, it just upsets you deeply to even consider it, then I don't know that you're ready for your weight loss journey. You have to be able to wrap your head around the idea that you can't eat exactly the same way that you did and expect different results. Your diet must change and it must be permanent. Now, if I have explained myself well at all, you will understand that when I'm talking about following a low carb diet or a non-toxic carb diet, I'm not talking about any kind of extreme program. Not that I don't personally believe in some extreme programs, but that's not even what I'm talking about. I'm talking about lowering the amount of carbohydrates in your diet until you are no longer at a toxic level. Now, I challenge you to find somebody that would argue that that's a fad diet, right? Low carb has been called a fad diet. When you're no longer eating the number of carbs that is making you sick, that's not a fad diet. That's a healthier diet. Now, when I was growing up, I was taught the food pyramid. And the base of that pyramid was carbohydrates. So as I grew older, I truly believed that things like pasta and bread were the healthy foods. And I was kind of led to believe that things like meat were kind of unhealthy. Certainly fat was something to be avoided at all costs. That was my paradigm growing up. And I think many people my age, I'm 47, had a similar paradigm. We were taught low fat, like avoid fat like the plague. Fat makes you fat. That is incorrect. Carbohydrates make you fat. If you are struggling with your weight, it is way more likely that you have overeaten refined carbohydrates than that you have overeaten fat. But you don't have to take my word for it. Right? You don't have to listen, obviously. You don't just listen to a single thing that I say. Go on out there and follow the standard advice for weight loss. Be my guest. If it doesn't work, I'll be right here waiting for you, talking to you about how the carbohydrates are the problem. But if you want to do your very best at following the food pyramid or the food plate or any kind of, government guidelines which indicate that we need to be eating a lot of carbohydrates, see how that works for you. See how small, frequent meals all day works for you. See how, fruit smoothies work for you, right? I have seen all of these things advised as weight loss strategies, and I've seen them fail and fail and fail. As I've mentioned several times before, most diets fail. And in my opinion, the reason most diets fail is because they are not addressing this very issue. They are not addressing carbohydrate toxicity, and they are not teaching people that certain foods make you fat, and if you keep eating them, you stay overweight. Let's say you're following what you believe is the perfect diet. You're doing everything correctly. You're following whatever calorie count that you were advised to follow. You're eating the appropriate number of fruits and vegetables and, complex carbohydrates and fiber grams and protein grams and every last thing. You're following it to a T and nothing is happening for you. Then by definition, it's not working. I don't care that it should work or that it's supposed to work or that it's correct. If it's not working, it isn't correct for you. The proof is on the scale. If it ain't moving, it ain't working. Now, it is very possible for us to change our diets and have a much healthier diet and not see weight loss. So unfortunately, that is a thing. I will cover that in a future video. For now, if you're following a certain dietary plan and you're not only not losing weight or, God forbid, you're gaining weight, please do what you can about lowering the carbohydrates in your diet. Okay, so let's say that you've bought into what I'm saying. You believe me that too many carbohydrates are toxic, that they are the source of most people's weight problem, and that it's time to get them out of your baseline diet so that you can actually make some progress in weight loss. All right, you're on board with me. Let's do this. Where do I start? Okay, good question. If I were advising somebody where to start in cutting carbs from their diet, my first target would be anything liquid carbohydrates. It is very difficult to lose any amount of weight if you're sipping on carbohydrates all day. So for example, if you are a soda drinker, a juice drinker, a energy drink drinker, if you drink sweetened coffee, sweetened tea, anything with sugar in it, that would be my primary goal for you, would be to very much reduce or eliminate those from your diet. If you're going to have that, I would only eat that with meals and certainly not sipping on it all day long. I made another video about why we get fat, and I explain why the drinking sugar is just not a good idea. So that would be step one. Okay. If you're able to eliminate drinking sugar, then the next thing I would go after would be junk. Okay. Like obvious junk. That would be, cookies, candies, cakes, crackers, chips, things that come in packages, things that you think of when you think of junk food. That would be next on the list. It should come as no surprise that if you want to lose weight, you can't eat junk food. Not on any kind of regular basis and not in any kind of high quantity. All right, so let's say you're not drinking any calories, you're not eating any junk food. Then we got to hit you where it hurts a little bit. This is where people get upset. And that would be to start pulling back on things like bread and pasta and rice and even my beloved potatoes. Okay? If nothing's happening and you're still eating those things, then they would be next on the chopping block. Now, what do I mean by nothing's happening? What I mean is if you go to your provider and you get blood work and you're told you have prediabetes or your fasting insulin is high or you have high triglycerides or anything that indicates that you probably have some level of carbohydrate toxicity and you're trying to fix that, if you then go back in 6 months and get more blood work done and it's still all high, then you haven't fixed it. You're still eating too many carbohydrates. So that would be an objective measure of whether or not you have too many carbohydrates in your diet. Another way is the scale moving? Now, unfortunately, depending on how far along you are in insulin resistance, you can cut carbs and not see the scale move. The other reason that you might not see the scale move is you might cut carbs, but you might still be eating enough calories to maintain your heavier weight. What does that look like? So a lot of times when people dive into eating low carb or eating keto, they find all these recipes to replace the junk that they loved with low carb versions. And the low carb versions don't have many carbohydrates, but they replace the carbs with fat. And so now instead of having, cookies, you're having some sort of keto cookies where they're like little fat bombs, which, they don't have the carbs. So you feel like you're doing something right. But if you're trying to mobilize the fat in your body, if you're trying to use up fat storage, your body doesn't have any real reason to use what's stored if it has plenty of access to what's in your stomach. So things like bulletproof coffee, which are these people add fat to coffee, which I've definitely had multiple times, so I'm not judging. But if you're drinking coffee with fat in it, and then you're having no carb pizza, which you're making pizza dough with almond flour and cheese and putting sauce and cheese and pepperoni on that, and then you're having, bacon wrapped whatever for dinner, or whatever the case may be. If you're eating a whole lot of calories throughout the day, then chances are you're not going to lose weight because your body's just going to burn up what you're feeding it. So just low carb is not a panacea for weight loss. You still got to pay off the back debt. You still got to mobilize your fat. So you still need to, in some way, reduce the amount of energy that's coming in. A lot of times people tell me, look, I tried low carb. I didn't feel well. That doesn't work for me. And so they just want to bail entirely and think that there's some other plan. I'm sorry to say, I truly don't believe there's another plan. I don't think there is. There are ways to lose weight without going low carb, but I've not seen any way to have a healthy level of weight maintained without having some level of lower carb than what someone was eating before. So the idea that you can continue to eat the level of carbohydrates that you were eating that puts you to a point where you had a lot of excess weight on your body, then lose the weight and then still eat that way is just it doesn't work. The weight comes back. And I think that's exactly why most diets fail. That's why people regain, is because they were eating a high level of carbs. They did some sort of intervention that lowered their carbs, be it fasting, be it weight loss surgery, be it medication, be it, extreme exercise, whatever. They substantially lowered how much carbs they were going in, or in the case of extreme exercise, they were burning it all off. And then once that intervention is done, they went back to that baseline diet, back to that level of carbs, all the weight comes back. So from my perspective, you can't lose a bunch of weight and maintain it and still eat a bunch of carbs. You just can't. The reason people feel like garbage when they start a low carb diet is because when we eat a lot of carbohydrates or sugar and our insulin is high, we hold on to a lot of fluid. And when we decrease the amount of carbohydrates in our body lets go of that fluid. Most of us have experienced the beginning of any diet where, we lose 5-10 pounds of water weight, right? It goes off quickly. And when that happens from eating low carb, it can even be more dramatic. And when we have a dramatic loss in fluid, we can feel terrible because our electrolytes get low, our salt, our potassium can get low, and we can feel dizzy and weak and disoriented and have mental fog. It's called the keto flu in the low carb community, but it really is a matter of dehydration and low electrolytes, basically. So if those were the consequences you experienced, the way to avoid them is, number one, stay hydrated when you reduce the carbohydrates from your diet, and number two, you can use things like bone broth, basically like soup with the stuff in it, right? That has, it's going to have salt in it. It's going to have, potassium, other electrolytes in it. Of course, if you have a condition that requires you to limit sodium in your diet, you need to take that up with your provider. So if you've been watching my videos since the beginning, then you know that I do not encourage people to make huge drastic changes all at once. I think that's a really good way to feel terrible, burn out, and quit. And I believe the same thing about reducing carbohydrates. Yes, I do believe that having excessive refined carbohydrates in your diet are probably making you sick. I think that you probably need to drastically remove them. But if you do it all at once and you feel like garbage and you quit, then I haven't really helped you at all. So I would start somewhere. That somewhere might be get an app, start tracking how many carbs you're eating, and then gradually reduce that number week by week until you start to see a change. That's one way to go about this thing. Now, when it comes to eating low carb, not only do we have the issue that we desperately want to keep eating those carbohydrates because it feels really good and we're addicted to them, we've got the other problem, which is that society in general is feeding us those carbs nonstop in every social environment, at every restaurant, and basically any food situation that you find yourself in. You are going to be bombarded with highly refined carbohydrates. It is so pervasive in our culture. Refined carbohydrates are everywhere. And so if you have a problem of having too much of them and you are constantly bombarded with them and they're highly addictive, and so you want to have them, it makes it that much harder to lose weight, to keep your head in the game, to stay on track. This is not an easy problem to solve. You got, on the one hand, highly palatable foods that your brain is screaming at you to keep eating. And on the other hand, you've got all your friends and family offering it to you nonstop. Like, how on earth do we ever expect anyone to lose weight if that's the problem and the solution is to dramatically reduce that food? That's why so many fail. That's why, people do these extreme things to lose the weight, lose it, and then put it back on because they're surrounded by the food that made them fat in the first place. And then they just go back to their old ways, and then all the weight comes back. It's incredibly difficult. So here I am starting this channel. What an exercise in futility. Where I'm basically saying, that diet literally everyone is following, that's your problem. I need you to not do what everyone is doing to lose weight forever. Look, I know no one is happy with me when I tell them to reduce the carbohydrates in their diet, whether that be my patients, whether that be friends and family that ask me for advice, right? I bet you strangers on the street would have hate in their heart for me if they asked what I ate and I told them. I get it, right? Low carb is a hard sell. All of us want to eat carbohydrates. It's part of our society. It's part of our culture. It brings us joy, man. I get it. But if we don't reduce it, we don't get to lose the weight. It's as simple as that. I did not make these rules. Please don't shoot the messenger. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you find value in my videos. And I will keep being here to help you along this journey as best I can and to tell you everything that I know about weight loss so that hopefully you can find the success you're looking for. Make good choices. It's a hard sell.